We're going to make a t-shirt. We're going to need a few supplies. Obviously a t-shirt, a cutting mat, a sketchbook, a X-Acto knife, a pencil, ruler, some white paint, a little sponge, it's a white acrylic paint by the way, and a shirt stretcher and a piece of poster board. The shirt stretcher is made out of a piece of foam core that I cut to size. The sketchbook happens to be the exact size that I want the image on the shirt to be, and so I'm just going to use one full page to do my image. I saw an idea for a t-shirt that I really liked a while back. It had 3 spray paint cans, and each can had a letter on it, and it spelled art. And I thought it was a super cool t-shirt, but I didn't want to copy it exactly. And while I love art and I thought that was a great idea, I decided that I wanted to do the word draw. And I wanted to use some utensils like pencils, Sharpies, paintbrush, and ink pen, like a nib and pen holder. So I start off to making some. I wanted them to be kind of short and stubby, and so this is my initial sketch. I'm convinced that pretty much everything should start in the sketchbook. Work your ideas out. As you're working your idea out in the sketchbook, other ideas are going to come to you. You're not going to feel like you're complete until you've done it on the canvas or done it on the t-shirt or whatever. And so you're going to keep on going, but your mistakes can be made right here in the cheap, ever useful sketchbook. So go ahead and make all the mistakes you need to in your sketchbook. Welcome to the Art Project. If you're new here, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the bell to be notified of future videos. So for this particular picture, I wanted to put letters inside each of the utensils. So I actually had to go back and make all of my utensils, all of my tools, all of my drawing tools a little bit fatter, which was awesome. I had made them kind of short and stubby looking, but by going back and making them even fatter, it just made them, I don't know, that much better looking, that much more whimsical. It was a lot of fun. Now, one of the things that is hard about this particular method is the stencil making. So once I get done laying out the picture pretty much the way that I want it, I have to go back and turn it into a stencil. And this was extra complicated because of the lettering. So take this little video and maybe simplify your idea a little bit for your first one. If indeed this is your first one. Stencil making is very hard to do. It's hard to kind of wrap your mind around some of the things that have to be done. And there's not a whole lot that I can necessarily tell you, except that you have to make sure that all of your pieces are connected. Otherwise, important information falls away. So as I was doing this, there were certain things that I wanted to be black, like the letters needed to be dark. The cap of the Sharpie needed to be dark. The tip of the pencil needed to be dark. The paintbrush needed to be dark. And I really wanted the handle of the paintbrush to be dark, and also wanted the handle of the pen holder, the nib holder, to be dark as well. So I did all of this in my sketchbook, and I liked the basic idea that I came up with, but it needed to change. It wasn't really going to work. So I got out a piece of tracing paper. I taped it down, and I began the process of tracing everything. Now, I probably would have done this anyway, but in this particular instance, I'm actually tracing things in order to make my stencil. I made the way that I wanted my stencil to begin with in my sketchbook, but I found out that I had some real problems. So I had to start redoing the stencil idea. It's a little bit complicated, but I think you'll see what I mean in the end. I wanted certain things to be dark and certain things to be light, and the way that I did my stencil in the sketchbook originally, the way I drew it, wasn't going to work. So I started drawing it on this tracing paper and redoing everything. The basic shapes are the same, but what I'm leaving white and what I'm making black and so on is changing. What I'm cutting out and what I'm leaving intact is changing here. It's a little bit complex, and I didn't realize that I needed, some close-ups of this. But again, until you've done your own stencil, watching somebody else do a stencil does not necessarily help a whole lot. It was a real struggle with this because I wanted to, like I said, make the handle of the paintbrush and the handle of the pen holder black. I eventually ended up scrapping that idea, just letting it go, and decided to make the handle of both of them white just because it was easier and I was running out of time. So I adjusted some things, and when I was satisfied, I pulled it out of my sketchbook. Now, I could have flipped it over, and as I traced everything here on the back of the tracing paper. Notice how the words are backwards, how the drawing is backwards. Well, I have to, in order to transfer, I have to draw all over the back of the tracing paper. But I can kind of skip that step if I recognize that everything's going to be backwards, and that I'm cutting it out backwards, and that eventually I have to flip it over. And it works out that way in this particular instance. It would not always work out, depending on what you're doing with your tracing paper and why you're transferring something. But as it is, it works out fine for this. Now, I also started making some changes here. I started realizing what I needed to do differently. And so since I'm just transferring it to this poster board, notice I have it taped down and I'm going over all of the pencil. You can see the faint pencil is what's on the bottom of the tracing paper, and the darker stuff is what I've already traced over. And so I'm transferring it to the poster board. Once I got it transferred to the poster board, I took the tracing paper off. You can see it kind of faintly transferred to the board. Now, you do not have to go over everything. If you can see it, then you can cut it out, and there's no need to go through and trace everything. The only things that I'm tracing are things that I am making some changes to. There are a few things, like I made the tip of the pen longer. I changed the reflected light on the paintbrush there. Changed the shape of the eraser on the pencil, and so on. Now, for the tedious cutting out, with a good sharp X-Acto knife and a cutting mat, I have begun the process of cutting out all of the little pieces. Now, all of these pieces should be sort of separate. If the pieces touch each other, then you've created a weakness in your stencil, and it could create problems later on. So everything here is very accurate and specific to how it needs to be cut out in the pieces. That way the stencil is strong and will hold up and not have anything kind of flapping in the wind. The center of the D is extremely small right here, and I will be cutting out that a little bit more after my first test run on a piece of black paper that I'm going to do. I noticed it was a lot smaller than it needed to be, and so I ended up cutting it out. Also changed the shape of the little lines on the pencil there. All right. So I'm going to test it out first with some white paint on this black paper. This little sponge that I have, I think, is like a makeup sponge. Somebody donated them to me a long time ago, and I've had them in my closet. Sometimes I use a foam roller, a foam paint roller, cheap, disposable, throwaway. You can spray paint if you want to. I thought about spray painting, but this just happened to be, I wanted to use acrylic paint. This is where I'm cutting out the center of the D to make it a little bit larger. I wanted to use acrylic paint because acrylic paint will set into the t-shirt and be permanent. I didn't get any kind of fancy fabric spray or fabric paint or anything like that. I just used strictly white acrylic paint. And another great thing about doing it this way is you can use the sponge and you can make it darker or lighter depending on how many layers of the paint that you put on there or how much paint is in your sponge. And that, my friends, is my t-shirt. The actual stenciling on the t-shirt goes a whole lot faster than the initial process. I put the tracing paper in my sketchbook and it's smeared like that because of the stick glue. There it is. Now it's your turn to go make a t-shirt. Subscribe, thumbs up, and don't forget to tap the bell for notifications.